The rain was already pouring when I realized my house key wasn't going to work. I stood on the porch, soaked from head to toe, knocking harder and harder while thunder cracked overhead. My hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the shock of understanding what had just happened. My own mother had locked me out of the house, not because I was late, not because I did something wrong, but because she wanted my room for her boyfriend's son. My name is Rachel. I was 19 years old that night, and I stood outside in the storm for hours while my family sat warm and dry inside, pretending I was the problem. It had started earlier that evening, before the rain turned violent. My mom told me, casually, like she was asking me to move a chair, that I needed to give up my room for a while. Just temporarily, she said. Mark's son needs the space. I asked where I was supposed to sleep. She rolled her eyes and said, "You can figure it out." By the time the storm hit, I was already outside, barefoot, holding my phone, waiting for her to open the door again. I kept telling myself she'd come to her senses, that no mother would actually leave her child out in weather like this. But minutes passed, then an hour. I knocked, I called, I texted. No answer. Rain soaked through my clothes. Water pooled around my feet. Cars drove past slowly, headlights flashing, people staring out their windows as I stood there shaking. At some point, a neighbor came out and asked if I was okay. I didn't even know what to say, because how do you explain that your own mother chose someone else's child over you and called you dramatic for reacting to it? By the time the police arrived, the storm wasn't the only thing that had exposed the truth. That night didn't just leave me wet and cold. It showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. The rain didn't slow down. It got heavier. Within minutes, my hair was plastered to my face, my clothes clinging to my skin like they weighed 100 pounds. Water ran down the porch steps in small streams, and every time thunder cracked overhead, my body flinched on instinct. I knocked again. Not angry knocking, not demanding. Just enough to say, "I'm still here." Nothing. I tried the handle once more, even though I already knew. Locked. Solid. Final. I pulled out my phone and called my mom, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Can you please open the door? It's really bad out here." No reply. Minutes stretched out in a way I'd never experienced before. Time didn't move normally. It dragged, thick and heavy, like the rain itself. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that she was mad and trying to scare me, that any second now, the door would open and she'd snap. "Get inside already." But the house stayed dark and quiet on my side. Through the window, I could see the glow of the living room TV. I could hear muffled laughter. Mark's voice, his son's voice. They were dry, warm, comfortable. I was standing outside like I didn't belong there at all. I wrapped my arms around myself and sank down against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. My teeth started to chatter, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Confusion, mixed with disbelief. What kind of mother does this? I replayed the argument in my head, searching for the moment where I must have crossed some invisible line. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't refused. I just asked where I was supposed to go. That question, apparently, was too much. The rain soaked through my shoes. My socks squelched every time I shifted my weight. My phone battery dropped lower and lower as I checked it compulsively, hoping for any sign of life from inside the house. Nothing. At some point, I heard a door open down the street. A neighbor stepped out under an umbrella, glanced in my direction, then paused. She hesitated, clearly unsure if she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. "Are you okay?" she called out over the rain. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out at first. The truth felt embarrassing, heavy. "I live here," I finally said, gesturing weakly toward the house behind me. She frowned. "Why are you outside?" I swallowed. My mom locked the door, Her expression changed immediately. Concern replaced confusion. "Do you want to come wait on my porch?" she asked. "You're soaked." Before I could answer, the front door behind me opened. My mom stepped out just far enough to be seen. "She's fine," she said sharply to the neighbor. "She's just being dramatic." I turned around, heart pounding. "Mom, please, just let me inside." She looked irritated, like I was inconveniencing her. "You're making a scene?" "I'm freezing," I said. "It's storming." "You'll survive," she replied. "Stop exaggerating." Then she went back inside and closed the door again. The neighbor stared at the door, stunned. "Do you want me to call someone?" she asked quietly. I nodded. By the time the police arrived, my hands were numb. My legs felt shaky, weak. I couldn't stop shivering, even when I tried. An officer asked me what was going on. Before I could answer, my mom came out again, arms crossed, voice calm and rehearsed. "She's upset because we asked her to give up her room," she said. "She's overreacting." The officer looked at me, then at my soaked clothes, then at the storm still raging around us. "This doesn't look like an overreaction," he said. For the first time that night, someone saw the situation for what it was. And standing there in the rain, surrounded by flashing lights and strangers, I realized something painful and clarifying at the same time. I wasn't outside because of the storm. I was outside because my mother had chosen someone else's comfort over my safety. The flashing lights looked unreal against the rain. Red and blue reflected off wet pavement, off the windows of houses that suddenly felt too close, too exposed. I stood there hugging myself, soaked, shaking, while the officers spoke quietly to my neighbor first. I could feel eyes watching from behind curtains. People who had lived next to us for years were seeing something they'd never seen before. A daughter locked out in a storm. One of the officers approached me slowly, voice calm. "How long have you been out here?" I tried to think. Time had blurred together. "A couple of hours," I said. He glanced at my clothes, my bare feet, the way my hands wouldn't stop trembling. "Have you been inside at all since the storm started?" I shook my head. Before he could ask more, the front door opened again. My mom stepped out, dry, wrapped in a sweater, irritation written all over her face like this was an inconvenience, not an emergency. "This is ridiculous," she said immediately. "I told you, she's being dramatic." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to explain why your daughter was locked outside during severe weather." "She's 19, my mom snapped. "She's not a child." That word, child, hung in the air. "But she lives here," the officer said evenly. My mom hesitated. Just a second. Enough to be noticed. "Well, she did," she said. "But we needed her room tonight." "For who?" the officer asked. "My boyfriend's son," she replied. "He's staying over." The officer's jaw tightened slightly. "And where was your daughter supposed to go?" My mom shrugged. "She could have gone to a friend's, or waited it out. It's just rain." I couldn't stop myself. "It's a storm," I said. My voice cracked despite my effort. I asked to come inside. My mom turned on me instantly. "I told you to stop making a scene." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, please." Another officer stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "Did you feel unsafe?" I nodded. "Were you prevented from entering the house?" "Yes." The rain kept falling, relentless, like it was determined to make the truth impossible to ignore. The officers exchanged a look. My mom's confidence wavered for the first time. "This doesn't need to be such a big deal," she said quickly. "Families argue." "Locking someone out in a storm isn't an argument," the officer replied. "It's a safety issue." I watched my mom's face change, from annoyed to defensive to something closer to fear. Not fear for me, fear of consequences. Neighbors had started gathering at a distance now, pretending to take out trash or check mail, all of them watching. My mom noticed, "This is embarrassing," she hissed at me under her breath. "You did this on purpose." I stared at her, stunned. "I just wanted to come inside." One of the officers spoke again. "Ma'am, we need to ensure she has a safe place to stay tonight." "She can come in now," my mom said quickly. "See? Problem solved." I didn't move. Something inside me had shifted. Going back inside like nothing happened suddenly felt impossible. The officer looked at me. "Do you want to go back inside?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No." That answer surprised even me. The neighbor who had first spoken up stepped forward. "She can stay with us tonight," she said firmly. "I won't leave her out here." My mom's eyes widened. "That's not necessary." "It is," the neighbor replied. The officer nodded. "That sounds like a good solution." They gave my mom a warning. Not an arrest, not handcuffs, but a record, a paper trail, and that mattered more than she realized. As I followed my neighbor away, wrapped in a dry towel, I looked back once. My mom was standing on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching people whisper. For the first time, the story wasn't under her control. And I knew, deep down, that when the rain stopped, nothing between us would ever be the same again. The storm eased sometime after midnight. The rain softened into a steady drizzle, then finally slowed enough that I could hear myself breathe again. I sat on my neighbor's couch wrapped in a blanket that smelled like clean laundry, staring at the muted TV without really seeing it. My body was warm now. My chest wasn't. The neighbor, her name was Linda, brought me a mug of tea and sat across from me, watching me with a concern that felt unfamiliar. "You can stay as long as you need tonight," she said. "No one should be out in weather like that." I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked gently, "Has this happened before?" I thought about it. Not the storm, not the police, but the choosing, the dismissing, the way my needs always seemed negotiable. "Not like this," I said, "but kind of." Linda didn't push. She just sighed quietly, like she'd already drawn her own conclusions. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Missed calls, text messages, group chats lighting up all at once. My mom had started talking. She didn't call me first. She called everyone else. She overreacted. She stormed out. She wanted attention. By noon, the phrase spread like it had been rehearsed. "She's just being dramatic." My aunt texted me, "Why would you involve the police over something like that?" Something like that. I typed back slowly. I was locked outside in a storm for hours. There was a long pause before she replied. "Your mom said you refused to come inside." I stared at the screen, disbelief washing over me. Refused. I remembered pounding on the door, begging, shivering. I remembered my mom looking straight at me and calling me dramatic. And now she was rewriting it. By the afternoon, messages started coming in with advice I hadn't asked for. "You should apologize. Families fight. Don't air dirty laundry. You embarrassed your mother." No one asked if I was okay. No one asked how long I'd been outside. They just wanted the discomfort to go away. When my mom finally called me directly, her voice was tight and controlled. "I hope you're happy," she said. "About what?" I asked. "You made me look like a monster," she snapped. "People are talking." "I didn't call the police," I said quietly. "The neighbors did," she scoffed. "Because you were acting hysterical." I closed my eyes. I was cold and locked out. "You could have come inside any time," she replied. The lie was so smooth it almost impressed me. "You told me no," I said. She sighed dramatically. "Rachel, this is exactly what I mean. You blow things out of proportion." I felt something settle in my chest then. Heavy. Final. "This isn't about proportions," I said. "It's about safety." She laughed bitterly. "You're 19. You need to grow up." "I did," I replied. "Last night." That made her pause. "You're not welcome back until you apologize," she said finally. "I won't have you disrespecting my relationship." There it was. Not concern, not regret, an ultimatum. For wanting to be inside during a storm? I asked. For causing trouble, she corrected. I ended the call. Not because I had something better to say, but because I finally understood something. She wasn't upset that I'd been hurt. She was upset that other people had seen it. The neighbors, the police, the witnesses. The storm had passed, but the damage was done. And the truth was clearer than ever. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being replaced. I didn't hear the truth from my mom. I heard it by accident. 2 days after the storm, I went back to the house in the afternoon while everyone was supposed to be out. Linda drove me over and waited in the car, just in case things went bad again. My hands were still shaking as I used my key, half expecting it not to work anymore. The door opened. Inside, the house looked the same, quiet, ordinary, like nothing had happened. That somehow hurt more than the rain. I went straight to my room, or what used to be my room. The door was closed. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. My bed was gone. Not moved. Gone. In its place was a smaller bed, different sheets, unfamiliar clothes folded on the chair. My posters were taken down, my desk pushed into the corner like an afterthought. I stood there, frozen. This hadn't been temporary. This hadn't been a misunderstanding. This had been planned. I heard voices from the kitchen and instinctively stepped back into the hallway, my heart pounding. My mom's voice drifted toward me, sharp and impatient. I told you she'd make it difficult, she said. Mark responded, quieter but firm. You said she'd already agreed. I handled it, my mom snapped. She always makes herself the victim. Then came the sentence that cut deeper than anything else. She's old enough to figure it out. My priority is this family now. This family, not our family. I pressed my back against the wall, the air leaving my lungs. The storm outside had soaked me. But this was worse. This was the truth with nowhere to hide. Mark's son laughed lightly. So this is my room now? Yes, my mom said without hesitation. Don't worry about her. She'll land on her feet. She always does. That phrase again? I realized then that the rain hadn't created the situation. It had exposed it. The door didn't close because of a bad argument or a bad night. It closed because I was no longer part of the plan. I stepped out quietly, not announcing myself, not confronting them. I didn't need explanations anymore. Everything I needed to know had already been said. In the car, Linda looked at my face and knew instantly. They changed your room, she said. I nodded. She exhaled slowly. I'm so sorry. For the first time since the storm, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears slipping down my face as I stared out the window, finally letting go of the hope that this was fixable if I just explained myself better. That night, I packed what was left of my things. My mom wasn't home. Mark wasn't home. The house was silent, like it was holding its breath. I took my clothes, my documents, the few items that actually mattered. I left the key on the counter, not out of spite, out of clarity. Later, my mom texted me, "You didn't have to sneak around like that." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I didn't sneak, I left. She didn't respond, and in that silence, I understood something that had taken me years to accept. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't selfish. I was inconvenient. And once I stopped being useful, the door stayed closed. The storm was over. But the aftermath lingered everywhere. Not in the streets or the sky, but in the way people looked at our house now. I noticed it the first time Linda and I drove past a few days later. Curtains shifted. Conversations paused. Someone who used to wave no longer did. People had seen me that night. They had seen the rain, the police cars, the girl shivering on the porch while the lights stayed on inside. And no amount of explaining could erase that image. My mom felt it too. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in her voice when she finally called again. Less sharp, less certain. "You didn't have to leave like that," she said. "You made things uncomfortable for everyone." I held the phone away from my ear for a second, steadying myself. "I didn't make anything uncomfortable," I replied. I was locked out. She sighed heavily. "People are talking." There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just damage control. "They don't know the full story," she continued. "They think I'm some kind of villain." I almost laughed. "They saw what happened." "That's not the same," she snapped. "You know how things look from the outside." I did. That was the problem. The outside had finally matched the inside. Over the next week, relatives started reaching out, not to help, but to smooth things over. My aunt suggested I let it go. My cousin asked if I could just apologize so everyone could move on. Move on from what? Being left in a storm? I stayed with Linda longer than planned. She never rushed me, never made me feel like a burden. She treated me the way I'd always assumed family was supposed to. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating quietly, she said, "You know, people don't call the police on loving homes." That sentence stayed with me, because it was simple, and it was true. My mom tried one last tactic. She showed up at Linda's house unannounced, wearing the face she saved for public spaces. Calm, concerned, wronged. "I just want my daughter back," she said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I stepped outside before Linda could respond. "You didn't want me back during the storm," I said calmly. "You wanted my room." Her eyes flashed. "You're twisting things." "No," I replied. "I finally stopped doing that for you." She looked around, realizing she had an audience. Her voice softened instantly. "Rachel, let's not do this here. This is exactly where it happened," I said. "Outside." She stared at me, stunned by my tone. Not angry, not begging. "Finished. I won't come back," I continued. "Not to that house, not to that role." "You're overreacting," she said automatically. The words falling out of habit. I shook my head. "You locked your daughter out during a storm and gave her room to someone else's child. That's not drama. That's a choice." She didn't have a response. She left shortly after, face tight, shoulders stiff. The next day, Linda helped me look at listings. Small rooms, shared spaces, nothing fancy, just safe. When I finally moved into a tiny room across town, it felt strange, empty, but peaceful. No slammed doors, no tension hanging in the air, just quiet. I lay on the bed that first night and realized something important. I wasn't mourning the house. I was mourning the mother I'd hoped she would be. And once I accepted that, the weight on my chest finally began to lift. I didn't hear from my mom for a while after that. At first, the silence felt strange, too quiet, like the calm before another argument. I kept waiting for the familiar cycle to restart, for the guilt, the accusations, the demand that I come to my senses. It never did. Instead, life moved forward in smaller, quieter ways. My new room was barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. The walls were thin. The window faced an alley, but the door locked from the inside, and no one else had a key. That mattered more than space. I started rebuilding slowly. A part-time job, a bus pass, cheap groceries, evenings that didn't end in tension or waiting for someone else's mood to shift. Sometimes, late at night, the memory of the storm came back to me, the sound of rain pounding on the porch, the feeling of knocking on a door that didn't open. The moment I realized no one inside was coming to save me. For a long time, I'd believed my mom when she said I was dramatic. Too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Standing in the rain changed that. It showed me the difference between exaggeration and danger, between conflict and neglect, between a child acting out and a parent choosing convenience over safety. A few weeks later, I ran into one of the neighbors at the grocery store. She recognized me immediately. "You're the girl from the storm," she said softly. I braced myself, unsure what came next. "I just wanted you to know," she continued. "A lot of us were worried about you. That wasn't okay." I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "You weren't dramatic. You were abandoned." That word settled into me like truth, finally finding the right place. My mom eventually sent a message. "I hope you've learned something from all this." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I have," I typed. "I learned what happens when I stop minimizing my own pain." She didn't respond, and for the first time, that didn't hurt. I didn't cut her off out of anger. I didn't forgive her out of obligation. I chose distance out of clarity. Because love doesn't lock you outside in a storm, and family doesn't call survival drama. I learned that night that being dramatic is loud, exaggerated, performative. What I did wasn't any of that. I stood in the rain because I had no choice. I asked for safety and was denied. I survived. And then I walked away. That wasn't drama. That was self-respect, finally finding its voice. And no matter what anyone says after that, I know the truth. The storm didn't break me. It showed me exactly where I needed to go.